Paul Newman exposed the 5 actors Hollywood was terrified of. Those blue eyes saw everything. Throughout his decades in Hollywood, Paul Newman worked alongside the industry's biggest stars, observing the machinery of fame from the inside. While cameras captured the glamour and talent, Newman witnessed what happened when those cameras stopped rolling. Paul kept a mental list, revealed a longtime friend who worked with Newman on multiple films. There were actors everyone in Hollywood feared, not just disliked or found difficult, but genuinely feared. The ones who could empty a room just by walking in. The ones who made experienced directors nervously check the exits. Unlike many stars who carefully maintained Hollywood's code of silence, Newman occasionally shared unfiltered observations with trusted colleagues about the industry's most intimidating figures. These weren't stories about typical Hollywood egos or creative temperaments, but about men whose behavior crossed lines into genuinely concerning territory. Tonight we reveal the 5 actors who earned places on Newman's private list of Hollywood's most feared figures. The men whose volatile personalities, unpredictable behavior, and capacity for both professional and physical intimidation created an atmosphere of genuine apprehension throughout the industry. Let's begin with the actor whose cold detachment and unpredictable outbursts made him a particular kind of Hollywood hazard, someone whose talent was matched only by his complete disregard for industry norms and basic professional courtesy.
Supported by the people with whom I work, with the grips and the juicers and the...
Robert Mitchum, the cold indifference. On screen, Robert Mitchum projected a captivating blend of danger and cool detachment that made him perfect for film noir and westerns. Off-screen, that detachment transformed into something colleagues found genuinely unsettling, a profound indifference to both professional standards and human connection that created an atmosphere of unpredictability on his sets. Cool on screen, cold in person, observed director Sidney Pollack, who discussed Mitchum with Newman during their collaboration on Absence of Malice. Paul had worked near Mitchum on a lot in the early days, and what struck him wasn't Mitchum's temper, though that could be explosive, but his fundamental disconnection from normal human concerns, the complete absence of worry about consequences. This disconnection manifested in Mitchum's notorious unreliability. He would show up to sets intoxicated, miss days of filming without explanation, or deliberately undermine directors' instructions, not from active malice, but from what appeared to be a genuine indifference to the collaborative process of filmmaking. Mitchum didn't care about anyone, or anything, noted a production manager who worked on several Mitchum films. It wasn't that he was deliberately trying to cause problems, it was that he genuinely didn't register other people's needs or concerns as relevant to his decisions. That created a kind of unpredictability that everyone from directors to fellow actors found extremely difficult to navigate. The unpredictability occasionally escalated beyond professional challenges into genuinely concerning behavior. Mitchum's volatile moods could shift without warning, sometimes resulting in physical confrontations with crew members who crossed him, often over seemingly minor issues that wouldn't trigger such reactions from other actors. He showed up drunk, threatened directors, and once headbutted a crew member for giving him line notes, said a script supervisor who witnessed several of these incidents. What made it particularly unnerving was the casualness of it. There wasn't the buildup of anger you'd see with other volatile actors. Mitchum could be calmly discussing a scene one moment and physically intimidating someone the next, with no apparent emotional shift between the states. Newman's own assessment of Mitchum, shared with colleagues after observing his behavior on neighboring sets, focused on this emotional disconnection rather than specific incidents. He recognized in Mitchum something beyond the typical difficult star, someone whose fundamental relationship to other people created unpredictable danger. He wasn't violent to be macho, he just had no use for people, Newman reportedly told a co-star after witnessing one of Mitchum's confrontations with a director. Paul made an important distinction there, the co-star later explained. He understood that Mitchum's behavior wasn't about establishing dominance or reputation like some Hollywood tough guys. It came from this deeper place of genuine disconnection, which made it both more authentic and more concerning. This assessment aligned with Mitchum's own public statements about his approach to both acting and life. He famously dismissed his profession as requiring less skill than ditch digging and maintained a public persona built around indifference to Hollywood's typical measures of success. What appeared as refreshing honesty in interviews translated to concerning unreliability in professional contexts. Actors respected his talent, but nobody wanted to share a set with him twice, concluded a casting director who worked during Mitchum's era. "That was the ultimate measure of how difficult he was. In an industry where connections and relationships drive careers, the fact that even directors who praised his performances would actively avoid working with him again spoke volumes about the experience of having him on set." Newman's assessment of Mitchum reflected his broader philosophy about professional behavior, that talent never justified mistreating others, and that the collaborative nature of filmmaking required a basic respect for the process that Mitchum's indifference fundamentally undermined.
"I'd probably just slowly strangle."
Wallace Beery, the menacing presence. Unlike Mitchum's cold detachment, Wallace Beery presented a different kind of Hollywood terror, a calculated cruelty directed particularly toward those with less power, combined with a public persona carefully crafted to mask his off-camera behavior. This gap between image and reality made him especially dangerous in Newman's assessment. "Golden Age icon and an absolute nightmare off-camera," said a film historian who documented Newman's rare comments about Hollywood's past. What Paul found particularly disturbing about Beery wasn't just specific incidents, but the systematic nature of his behavior, how he would deliberately target those least able to defend themselves while maintaining a carefully constructed public image of lovable gruffness. This targeting was most evident in Beery's treatment of child actors, women, and lower-level crew members, those with minimal industry protection or whose careers could be most easily damaged by challenging a star of his stature. Multiple accounts from his productions describe patterns of verbal abuse, intimidation, and occasionally physical aggression. Beery was a known bully, especially to child actors and women, confirmed Jackie Cooper, who worked with Beery as a child on The Champ, and later discussed those experiences with Newman. Paul was particularly concerned about how the studio system had enabled and covered for Beery's behavior, creating a situation where vulnerable people had nowhere to turn when subjected to his abuse. This institutional protection extended beyond managing Beery's on-set behavior to potentially covering up more serious incidents. The most notorious of these involved persistent rumors about Beery's possible connection to the death of Three Stooges founder Ted Healy, who died following a confrontation outside the Trocadero nightclub in 1937. Rumors swirled for decades that he was involved in the death of Ted Healy, founder of the Three Stooges, noted a researcher who tracked these allegations. While never proven, these rumors reflected the industry's understanding of Beery's capacity for violence and the studio's ability to manage potential scandals involving valuable stars through their connections with law enforcement and the press. Newman's assessment of Beery came not from personal interaction, but from conversations with older actors and crew members who had worked with him directly. These first-hand accounts painted a consistent picture of someone whose public charm masked a private cruelty that created genuine fear among those forced to work with him. "You could feel the room change when he walked in. The air got heavier," Newman reportedly observed after hearing multiple accounts of Beery's on-set behavior. This comment reflected Paul's understanding that Beery's impact wasn't just about specific incidents, but about creating an atmosphere of constant anxiety, where everyone was perpetually braced for his next outburst or targeted cruelty. What particularly concerned Newman about figures like Beery was how their behavior had been normalized and protected by the studio system, establishing patterns that would continue to influence industry culture long after Beery himself had left the scene. The gap between public persona and private behavior represented for Newman one of Hollywood's most fundamental and damaging deceptions. Newman saw in Beery an early template for how the industry would manage difficult stars, explained a colleague who discussed Hollywood history with Newman. The public image carefully constructed to hide problematic behavior. The studio protection that insulated stars from consequences. The expectation that others would simply endure abuse as part of the price of working in film. These patterns established during Beery's era continued to shape Hollywood long after his death. This historical perspective informed Newman's own approach to stardom, his deliberate creation of working environments characterized by mutual respect, his refusal to participate in the star system's more exploitative aspects, and his consistent treatment of crew members as valued collaborators rather than disposable support staff.
This is my business, and midnight is my beat, and it takes me to the real story behind 1,000 front.
Sterling Hayden, the volatile force. Standing 6 feet 5 inches with a commanding physical presence, Sterling Hayden brought an authentic intensity to his film roles that few actors could match. That same intensity, however, extended beyond the cameras in ways that made him one of Hollywood's most physically intimidating and unpredictable figures. The face of gritty film noir and the fists to match, observed a film critic who discussed Hayden with Newman during a retrospective event. What made Hayden particularly concerning in Paul's assessment wasn't just his capacity for anger, but its unpredictability. Unlike actors who were consistently difficult, Hayden could be perfectly professional for weeks and then suddenly erupt over seemingly minor issues. This volatility created a unique kind of tension on Hayden's sets. Crews never knew which version of the actor would show up on any given day, the focused professional or the volatile presence capable of sudden and intimidating outbursts. This uncertainty made working with him particularly stressful even during periods when his behavior appeared stable. Hayden was big, angry, and violent, confirmed a production manager who worked on multiple Hayden films. His physical presence alone was intimidating enough, but combined with his unpredictable temper, it created situations where people felt genuinely unsafe. It wasn't just difficult behavior. It was behavior that made people worry about their physical safety. Newman's observation of Hayden came partly through direct interaction on neighboring sets, and partly through conversations with directors and actors who had worked with him more extensively. These accounts painted a consistent picture of someone whose personal demons translated into genuinely concerning workplace behavior. He had two settings: brooding and explosive. Newman reportedly told a co-star after observing one of Hayden's confrontations with a producer. Paul wasn't exaggerating for effect, the co-star later explained. He was describing exactly what made Hayden so difficult to work with, that simmering intensity that could erupt without warning, creating an atmosphere where everyone felt like they were handling nitroglycerin. The explosive side of Hayden's personality occasionally manifested in ways that went beyond typical Hollywood conflicts into genuinely concerning territory. His confrontations with producers, directors, and studio executives sometimes escalated from verbal disagreements to physical intimidation or actual threats of violence. He once threatened a producer with a hammer during contract talks, said a studio employee who witnessed the incident. It wasn't just heated negotiation. It was a moment where everyone in the room genuinely feared for their safety, and the disturbing thing was how quickly Hayden could escalate to that level, from calm discussion to holding a weapon in what seemed like seconds. What complicated the industry's relationship with Hayden was his undeniable talent and authentic screen presence. Directors recognized that his personal intensity, however difficult to manage off-camera, translated into performances with a raw power that few actors of his era could match. This created a reluctant tolerance for behavior that would have ended most other careers. Hollywood used him when they needed danger, and stayed out of his way otherwise, noted a casting director from that period. It became a calculation. Was his performance worth the risk and difficulty of having him on set? For certain roles, the answer was yes, which created this strange dynamic where his behavior was simultaneously feared and accommodated. Newman's assessment of Hayden reflected his broader concern with how Hollywood's prioritization of talent over behavior created dangerous working environments and established problematic precedents. By tolerating Hayden's volatility because of his box office value, the industry reinforced the idea that certain levels of misconduct were acceptable costs of artistic achievement.
We've been years building up the rules that we live by, and if you break them, you have to answer for it here, in our court. You cannot escape it in Boys Town.
Spencer Tracy, The Hidden Darkness. Few figures in Hollywood history maintained a greater gap between public perception and private reality than Spencer Tracy. Widely respected for both his remarkable talent and his seemingly straightforward professionalism, Tracy concealed behind that celebrated facade a darkness that those who worked closely with him came to genuinely fear. A legend with a secret side, said a film historian who documented accounts from Tracy's colleagues. What made Tracy particularly concerning in Newman's assessment wasn't just specific behavior, but the profound disconnect between his public reputation and the reality experienced by those who worked with him. That gap made his darker moments even more disorienting and difficult to navigate. The core of this disconnect lay in Tracy's relationship with alcohol. While his drinking problems weren't entirely unknown within the industry, the severity of their impact on his behavior was carefully managed by studios and colleagues, creating a protected space for conduct that would have destroyed less valuable careers. Tracy was a brilliant actor and a mean drunk, confirmed a crew member who worked on several Tracy productions and later shared those experiences with Newman. The unpredictability was what created the fear. Tracy could be completely professional and focused for weeks, then appear on set in a state where his entire personality seemed transformed into something dark and genuinely frightening. This transformation manifested in behavior that went beyond typical difficult star territory into genuinely concerning treatment of those around him. During these episodes, Tracy could become verbally vicious, emotionally cruel, and occasionally physically intimidating, particularly toward crew members and supporting actors with less power to challenge or avoid him. He was physically abusive, emotionally unpredictable, and nobody dared stand up to him because of his box office pull, explained a director who discussed Tracy with Newman after they had both worked with him in different capacities. What Paul found particularly disturbing was how effectively Tracy's star power silenced those who experienced his worst behavior. People who would normally speak up about mistreatment remained quiet because challenging Tracy could end careers. Newman's own assessment of Tracy contained a complex duality. He openly admired Tracy's extraordinary talent and studied his performances for technical brilliance, but he also recognized in Tracy a cautionary example of how the industry's protection of valuable stars could enable genuinely harmful behavior while maintaining public images that revealed nothing of that reality. Newman admired his talent, but told close friends people were scared of what he'd say and terrified of what he'd do, recalled someone who knew both actors. Paul saw in Tracy a perfect example of Hollywood's moral compromises, how the industry would construct elaborate systems to protect and enable behavior in valuable stars that would never be tolerated in anyone less commercially important. This enabling system extended throughout the studio structure, from production schedules designed to accommodate Tracy's better periods to publicity departments that carefully maintained his public image as the straightforward, no-nonsense professional. This institutional support allowed problematic behavior to continue far longer than would have been possible without such protection. The studios created buffer zones around Tracy, noted a producer familiar with how his productions were managed. They would assign specific crew members known for their ability to handle difficult stars to his productions. They would adjust scheduling to film his most demanding scenes during his typically more stable morning hours. They would create systems to work around his issues rather than addressing them directly. What particularly concerned Newman about the Tracy situation was how it represented a broader pattern in Hollywood: the willingness to organize entire productions around accommodating difficult behavior rather than establishing basic standards of professional conduct that applied equally to everyone regardless of their star power or commercial value.
It was like having this close to your dreams, and then watch them brush past you like a stranger in a crowd. At the time, you don't...
Burt Lancaster, The Calculated Power. If Robert Mitchum represented cold indifference and Spencer Tracy concealed darkness behind a professional facade, Burt Lancaster embodied a different kind of Hollywood terror: the calculated, strategic use of power to maintain absolute control, not through volatile outbursts, but through precise, measured intimidation that left even the most powerful industry figures careful in his presence. He smiled for the cameras, but behind closed doors, he was a control freak with a fuse shorter than a cigarette, observed a director who worked with Lancaster and later discussed that experience with Newman. What made Lancaster particularly effective at creating fear wasn't loud, public displays of temper, but the quiet precision of his control. He understood exactly how much pressure to apply in any situation to get exactly what he wanted. This approach reflected Lancaster's unconventional path to stardom. Unlike actors who came up through the studio system, Lancaster had entered Hollywood as an adult with significant life experience, including time as a circus acrobat and service in World War II. This background gave him both physical confidence and a strategic mind that he applied to navigating the industry's power structures. He could make or break you with one phone call, and he knew it, confirmed a producer who experienced Lancaster's influence firsthand. Burt understood Hollywood's power dynamics better than most executives. He knew exactly who made which decisions, what their vulnerabilities were, and how to leverage his own value to maximum advantage. That knowledge made him genuinely formidable in ways that went beyond typical star power. Lancaster's approach to maintaining control rarely involved public confrontation or obvious displays of temper. Instead, he operated through precisely targeted private conversations, strategic relationships with key decision-makers, and an accumulated reputation that meant his preferences would be accommodated without requiring explicit threats. Newman said, "He never yelled. He didn't have to. Everyone already knew the cost of crossing him. recalled a colleague who discussed Lancaster with Newman after they had both worked with him. That was what made Burt so effective at creating fear, the efficiency of it. He didn't waste energy on dramatic displays. He had established his willingness and ability to create consequences for those who challenged him, which meant he rarely had to actually do so. This efficiency extended to how Lancaster managed his sets and productions. Unlike volatile stars whose difficult behavior often created chaos, Lancaster's controlling nature actually made productions run smoothly, but on his terms and according to his vision, regardless of nominal authority structures or creative hierarchies. Writers, actors, even studio heads, they all walked carefully around Burt, noted a screenwriter who experienced Lancaster's control firsthand. What was remarkable was how Lancaster could effectively take over a production without creating obvious conflict. Directors would find themselves implementing Burt's vision while believing it was their own idea. Writers would discover their scripts being reshaped according to his preferences through seemingly collaborative processes that somehow always ended with his version prevailing. Newman's assessment of Lancaster came from both direct interaction and observation of his impact throughout the industry. While acknowledging Lancaster's extraordinary talent and intelligence, Newman recognized in his approach to power something that created a unique kind of apprehension among even Hollywood's most established figures. He wasn't the loudest, but he was the most feared, Newman reportedly commented after witnessing Lancaster's influence during a production meeting. Paul understood exactly what made Burt so effective, explained someone who was present. It wasn't emotional volatility or physical intimidation, though he was capable of both if necessary. It was his strategic approach to power, his ability to identify exactly what leverage would be most effective in any situation and apply it with surgical precision. What particularly impressed and concerned Newman about Lancaster was his comprehensive understanding of the industry's machinery, not just the creative aspects, but the business structures, the personal relationships, and the specific pressure points that could be used to maintain control in an environment where formal authority was often fluid and situational. As we reflect on Newman's assessments of Hollywood's most feared actors, a pattern emerges that reveals much about both the men themselves and the industry that accommodated their behavior. Each represented a different approach to wielding power. Mitchum through indifference to consequences, Beery through targeted cruelty, Hayden through volatile unpredictability, Tracy through the protection of his public image, and Lancaster through strategic control. Newman saw these five as representing different aspects of how power could corrupt in Hollywood, observed director Sidney Pollack, who discussed the industry's darker side extensively with Newman. Paul believed that how someone handled power revealed their true character. These were men whose behavior showed what happened when talent and commercial value insulated people from normal consequences for their actions. This perspective informed Newman's own approach to his career and status within the industry. As his star rose and his own power grew, he deliberately established a different model, creating sets known for their professionalism and mutual respect, using his influence to protect rather than intimidate others, and demonstrating that commercial success and artistic achievement didn't require tolerating or enabling harmful behavior. Paul's assessments of these difficult figures wasn't just about judgment, but about establishing a counterexample, explained a producer who worked with Newman during the 1980s. He had watched a generation of stars use their power in ways he found disturbing, and he made conscious choices to demonstrate that alternatives were possible, that being a leading man didn't have to mean being feared or accommodated at others' expense. What gives Newman's perspective particular value isn't just his status within the industry, but the consistency between his assessments and his own conduct. Unlike critics who held others to standards they themselves ignored, Newman established through decades of professional relationships a reputation for treating everyone, from fellow stars to crew members, with the same fundamental respect. The most telling thing about Newman's list of feared actors is that he never appeared on anyone else's, noted a film historian who documented accounts from Hollywood's golden age. In an industry where difficult behavior was often normalized and even celebrated as evidence of artistic temperament, Paul demonstrated that sustained success could be achieved without creating atmospheres of fear or requiring special accommodation for bad behavior. This legacy extends beyond Newman's own career to the example he established for subsequent generations of actors. By demonstrating that star power could be used constructively rather than destructively, he helped establish a template for how leading performers could contribute to creating healthier, more functional production environments rather than demanding exceptional treatment or immunity from normal professional standards. The most significant insight from Newman's observations isn't about these specific difficult figures, but about the systemic issues they reveal. How commercial considerations consistently overrode basic workplace standards, how star power created environments where abusive behavior could flourish without consequence, and how these patterns became self-perpetuating as each generation learned from and emulated its predecessors. In understanding Newman's perspective on Hollywood's most feared actors, we gain insight not just into specific historical figures, but into the industry's ongoing challenge to balance artistic achievement with basic human dignity, a challenge that continues to resonate in contemporary conversations about power, accountability, and the true cost of allowing talent to excuse behavior that would be unacceptable in any other professional context. If you found this exploration illuminating, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more examinations of Hollywood's complex history. Share your thoughts in the comments about which of these revelations surprised you most or what other aspects of classic Hollywood you'd like us to explore in future videos. Remember that understanding the full context of entertainment history, including its troubling aspects, helps us appreciate both how far the industry has come and how much work remains in creating truly equitable and respectful creative environments.